Writing the West. Stories and poems by Rick Steber. Read by Michael Messner and friends. The First Winter. Elizabeth Laughlin recalled her first winter after coming out west.
We crossed the Oregon Trail in a covered wagon and did not reach the Dalles, Oregon until winter was setting in. Father said it could snow at any time, so rather than trying to cross the mountains, he began cutting trees and shaping logs for a house. He cut small trees so, with what assistance Mother could give him, he could lay them up. During that long winter, our supplies dwindled, and finally the day came when Mother announced she was short of flour and could not bake more bread. That evening, she made a stew of some birds Father had shot, and there was just enough flour to thicken the gravy. About the time we were ready to sit down at the table, 2 men, who had been down along the river hunting for lost horses, came up and asked if they could eat with us. They offered to pay, but Father refused and told them to take a seat at the table. They ate and seemed genuinely delighted with the stew. After dinner, the 2 men emptied their pockets of hardtack, which they gave to my brothers. They gave me a gold coin. After they were gone, I cried and cried, because I would have much preferred to have the crackers than the gold coin.
Giant. The Coquille Indians of the southern Oregon coast have handed down from one generation to the next the story of the cannibal giant. The legend relates that one day a giant walked out of the woods. This huge, hairy creature was a curiosity to the natives, and they came to stare at him. The beast moved away from the gathering crowd and took refuge in a cave. In the evenings, he could sometimes be observed sitting at the entrance of his cave or walking through the woods or along the beach. When the first native child disappeared, it was assumed a rogue wave had washed the child out to sea. But then a second and a third child disappeared. The natives began to wonder if the giant in the cave had something to do with the disappearances.
"I have never seen the giant eat,"
testified one of the men. A guard was posted near the entrance to the cave, and he listened as the giant called to a group of children, enticing them with a handful of trinkets. One boy came near to look at the trinkets, and when he was within reach, the giant grabbed him, wrapped him in a blanket, and carried the boy into his cave. Although the natives were not able to save the boy, they devised a plan. They waited until the giant had fallen asleep, and then they rolled boulders off the hill and blocked the entrance to the cave. They poured hot ashes into the narrow spaces between boulders. The earth shook with the screams and rantings of the terrible flesh-eating giant, but finally quiet once again returned to the south coast. Edge of land. He journeys to the edge of land to try and forget, hoping the ocean will fix his broken heart. Here the shifting sand is white as chalk. Blue waves roll in and roll out again. The air is gray, dank, and sullen. The setting sun lays bare his soul in strange ways he can never describe, causing him to search inside for answers as to whether this day or his world is ending. Butch and Sundance. There was no way to foresee from his strict religious upbringing — his father had come to Utah with the original Mormon handcart brigade — that Robert Parker would turn to lawless ways. But Parker was befriended by a small-time criminal named Mike Cassidy, and at age 16, the boy left home to ride the outlaw trail using the alias George Cassidy. Parker traveled to Colorado, robbing trains and holding up banks, and for a time worked in a butcher's shop. After that, he became known as Butch Cassidy. Butch was arrested for cattle rustling in 1892 and sentenced to a 2-year stretch in the Wyoming State Penitentiary. After his release, he formed the notorious Wild Bunch to rob trains and banks. By the turn of the century, the law was closing in. Butch and his outlaw friends, Harry Longbow, better known as the Sundance Kid, and Etta Place, Sundance's girlfriend, fled to South America. For a while, the trio operated a cattle ranch in Argentina. Early in 1908, Butch and Sundance were in a gunfight with Bolivian soldiers, and Sundance was killed. Butch returned to the United States and lived under the name William Phillips. In 1910, he moved to Spokane, Washington, and established Phillips Manufacturing Company, producing business equipment. After losing the company during the Great Depression, he made several unsuccessful trips to his old haunts, searching for loot he had buried while riding with the Wild Bunch. His last days were spent trying to market a manuscript he had written titled The Bandit Invincible, based on his life as Butch Cassidy. He found no takers and died in 1937 at Broadacres, the Spokane County Poor Farm. Stink bug. Uncle Ben was known as a frequent imbiber. In fact, he brewed his own personal blend of spirituous liquor and carried a small flask in his hind pocket at all times. He claimed he saved it only for special occasions. One such special occasion took place on a fishing trip when he forgot to bring along the can of worms. He searched high and low, turning over logs and rocks looking for some likely insect that he could substitute for bait. But there was nothing to find until he spied a big stink bug in a clump of crested wheatgrass. He picked it up and, thinking he should freshen it a bit, removed his flask and poured a healthy shot down the open mouth of the black bug. He worked the bug onto the hook and threw his bait into the lake. For a time, the bobber sat on the flat sheen of the water, and then it began doing funny things. It dipped and danced and finally plunged under the surface. Uncle Ben grabbed up the rod, and a terrific battle ensued. Line was pulled off at a furious rate. The reel began smoking so badly that Uncle Ben, fearing it would burn up, dipped it in the water to cool it. When there were only a few more yards of line left on the reel, he hurriedly tied off to a nearby tree. For the next couple of hours, he pulled in line, hand over hand, finally managing to yard the fish up on the bank. It was a bass, the granddaddy of all bass. What confounded Uncle Ben was the fact that the fish did not have the hook in its mouth. It turned out that the stink bug had wrapped its arms and legs around the bass's lip, and it refused to let go of the bass until a liberal dose of spirits was once again poured down its throat.
You've been listening to Writing the West. The stories and poetry in this podcast are by Rick Steber and appear in Books by Him. Log on to www.ricksteberauthor.com to find out more. This program was produced by Michael Messner by permission of the author. Special thanks to Michael Tucker, Rachel Pulliam, and Art Shingler. Thank you for listening.